Elizabeth and Albert. Their love helped them and their country. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Queen Elizabeth, A Day in Her Life. Today we're going to take a look at Queen Elizabeth's parents, George VI and Elizabeth. They had a strong love that helped them to run the United Kingdom and a love that kept them strong. So their love showed Queen Elizabeth II how a husband and wife could be, and she had a marriage that lasted a lifetime too. Prince Albert fell in love with Lady Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon when they first danced at the Royal Air Force Ball in the Ritz Hotel, July the 8th, 1920. This is from the book George VI and Elizabeth. Elizabeth was vivacious and pretty, and she had plenty of proposals of marriage. Albert soon joined the list. They dated for 2 years. He proposed to her 2 times. She said that they could be good friends, and Albert was about to give up. But thanks to interventions from a half a dozen people, he asked her a 3rd time. It was said by some that Elizabeth didn't want to marry him because she didn't want to be a queen. And the book states that Elizabeth never thought Albert would be king, but she figured she would be a member of the royal family carrying out public engagements. But her family gave her a nudge as well as friends, so they got engaged January 1923, and they married 4 months later. The Queen Mother said that when she was engaged for a year or 2, her brother had told her, "Look here, you must either say yes or no. It's not fair." She thought about it and realized he was right, and she said it was good to have brothers. So Elizabeth wrote to her friend, Beryl Pognan, a week after she accepted Bertie's proposal, "I am so happy and most surprised, as I never thought I'd marry him." Writing to his mother the following day, Bertie admitted uncertainty about Elizabeth's state of mind. "I am very, very happy," he said, "and I can only hope that Elizabeth feels the same way I do. I know I'm very lucky to have won her over at last." So it was confusing to know if Elizabeth was really in love, but she said if she wasn't in love with Bertie, she could learn to love him. And when they married, she never looked at anyone else, and she was devoted to her husband. They made a loving couple. She loved to tease and she loved to laugh. And Albert was different. He was timid, awkward, and doubting. Elizabeth was her husband's defender. And photographer Cecil Beaton was quoted as saying, "Elizabeth could be steely, a marshmallow made on a welding machine." They were overjoyed with the birth of Elizabeth. She was born April 21st, 1926. The Queen Mother said that Princess Elizabeth was going to be very wicked and very quick, I think. She wrote that to her mother. And when George VI and Elizabeth had to go on tour and leave Elizabeth behind, this upset the 2 of them. Elizabeth said she went up to play with the baby. She was so sweet. She drank some champagne and tried not to cry. George VI, leaving the baby, said gave him a terrible pang. He said to his mother, Queen Mary, "She'll be so grown up when we return." While on the voyage, they talked and read from a library that was stocked with popular titles by authors including P.J. Wodehouse, John Bertram, and Agatha Christie. Sometimes Bertie would read to his wife, and other times he played deck tennis or shot clay pigeons. In the evening they had cocktails, and after dinner they played mahjong and watched films or danced to the gramophone records. Bertie and Elizabeth wanted to hear news about the baby. Elizabeth said, "I miss the baby all the time, and I'm always wondering what she's doing." She wrote that in her diary after a month at sea. Princess Elizabeth, in the meantime, was being treated like a princess by her grandparents. She stayed with George V and Queen Mary at Buckingham Palace. They created an airy nursery in the north wing. Every day she was dressed in a white gown and a fringed sash, and she was taken to see the king and queen at tea time. Queen Mary would say, "Here comes the bambina." Bertie and Elizabeth would tour New Zealand and Australia, and it took a lot to stay engaged with the crowds. The staff understood when the king got tired and he was a little bit snappy. The Queen Mother never appeared bored or tired in public, but she wrote to her mother saying, "Though we're working very hard, some of it is boring." Elizabeth wrote the Queen about the people's loyalty and that it gives one a lump in the throat. And the crowd was in love with the baby Elizabeth, and she was nicknamed Princess Betty. Finally, Bertie and Elizabeth made it back home. They rode back to Buckingham Palace in heavy rain in an open carriage. Elizabeth had an umbrella and smiled all along the way, and they were reunited with Princess Elizabeth. She was in the arms of her nurse, but she had been shown photographs of her mother and father in the nursery, and she was told that they were father and mother. So when she saw her mother, she said, "There's Mother." And Queen Mary, she was touched by that when she heard it and said, "Oh, you darling." Elizabeth and Bertie went to the balcony, and Elizabeth had Princess Elizabeth in her arms. And she was a natural even then, waving at the crowd, vigorously, and she was smiling. Princess Elizabeth, that is. So the trip they took was successful. George VI had been nervous about speaking publicly because of his stuttering problems, but he had no trouble. Elizabeth told Queen Mary that Bertie was far less shy and more sure of himself, and Bertie told his father Elizabeth had done wonders. I could never have done it without her help. Their love and admiration for each other shone through. And then they started living at 145 Piccadilly. It was a big place that required servants such as a butler, an under-butler, a housekeeper, 2 footmen, a cook, 2 kitchen maids, the Duke's valet, the Duchess' dresser, 3 personal maids, a nurse, an under-nurse, a nursery maid, an odd job man, an orderly, a telephonist, and a chauffeur. So the Yorks entertained a lot with small dinner parties for friends, and they had a pet parrot from Australia, and they taught it to say, "Hello, Jimmy, have a drink." And sometimes after they had gone to the theater, they would prepare their own dinner. And when they were on their own, Elizabeth played the piano or read a book. And the Duke worked in his study most mornings with his staff, and he had meetings at the house to improve industrial relations. At night, the Duke and Elizabeth entertained diplomats and politicians. So Elizabeth had been raised informally, and she did that with her daughter, Princess Elizabeth. And the Duke's upbringing was more rigid. And Bertie and Elizabeth showed their love for Princess Elizabeth openly. They avoided the upper-class presentation of children at tea time. Elizabeth liked to play with the princess, and she would pretend with her that the couch was a train going to Scotland. And seeing that inspired Bertie to loosen up, and he would play in the garden with Princess Elizabeth and splashed her when she took a bath. Elizabeth remembered what Bertie's father told them. One day when Bertie and Elizabeth went to see the king, King George V told them that David would never take over from him, and they were shocked when he said that. George V told Bertie, "You'll see, your brother will never become king." Bertie and Elizabeth thought it was funny because they thought he was going to be a wonderful king. But the king's feeling was right, and he wasn't the only one that felt that way. Prime Minister Baldwin served the Prince of Wales for 8 years. At first he idolized him, and then he discovered he was a man who was vulgar and selfish. And he told the Prince of Wales he was quitting, and he told David what he thought of him. He also told David he would lose the throne of England, and Prince David thought of his words and felt that they were so true that his words, he said, almost melted me. The Prince of Wales accepted the resignation and gave Baldwin an automobile as proof that they had parted friends. Well, Bertie and Elizabeth have a second child. Elizabeth, after 6 hours of labor, gave birth on August 21st, 1930, 9:22 p.m. to a 6-pound, 3-ounce girl. That night, thousands of people gathered in the village of Glamis and followed a kilted band of bagpipers to the top of Hunter's Hill, where a 30-foot bonfire was built. So they lit it and danced around the bonfire, and the bagpipers played Highland Lassie and the Duke of York's Welcome, which they had just composed. Elizabeth watched from her room, and the fire could be seen for 6 counties. Queen Mary was disappointed it wasn't a boy, but surprisingly, George V said he was glad it was a girl, because you could play with the girls longer than with boys, and the parents were young and had plenty of time to have a son. On September the 6th, Elizabeth told the Queen that they were going to name their daughter Margaret Rose instead of Margaret Anne, because Bertie didn't like the name Anne. And when she was christened, Elizabeth wrote that she has large blue eyes and a will of iron. As long as she can disguise her will and use her eyes, then all will be well. Elizabeth had known Bertie since they were children. She turned him down 2 times before deciding to marry him. She felt like her life would be changed by being in the royal family. But finally, after encouragement from friends and family, she accepted his proposal. Love grew, and Elizabeth became his biggest supporter. Just as George V gave credit to his wife Mary for helping him with his kingly duties, George VI praised Elizabeth and felt he couldn't have done all the things he had done without her. It was a relationship that was meant to be, and in doing so, it gave Albert a wonderful family and a woman who could show him just how great he could be in his royal duties. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, if you could give it a thumbs up, it would help to let me know that I'm on the right track. If you hadn't hit the notification bell, if you could do that, it will let you know whenever a new video is released. I wish everybody a great day, and tune in again soon for another episode of Queen Elizabeth, A Day in Her Life. Thank you. Bye.